In this episode, we're going to look at the 2025 NFHS Baseball Rules Questionnaire that's been sent out to coaches and umpires, looking for their feedback on recent rules changes, as well as issues that they're seeing in the games and what changes you might be open to in the future. I'll take you through the questions in the questionnaire and give you some of my feedback and thoughts on this, and hopefully give you an idea of how you might feel about some of these things. So we'll work our way through it. A lot of opinion here. Be sure to let me know in the comments what you think, if there's anything you disagree with me on. But certainly don't forget to take the questionnaire, which closes on April 29th. The first part of the questionnaire asks about the 2025 rules changes and whether or not you thought they were satisfactory. The first one was modifying that resin, pine tar, or any other drying agent is permitted on the bat in a specific area. Yes or no? So for this one, I ended up putting no. I like that we did clarify that pine tar is legal on a metal bat, although I don't think anyone would have argued it wasn't previously. That said, I would like to see the NFHS modify this rule to have the exception that exists at the NCAA and professional levels, where a bat that has pine tar beyond the handle isn't going to result in an out and a restriction of the coach. Now, the second rules change from last year modified the definition of forfeiture of a game. Personally, I didn't think that was an issue again either, but I think the change was fine that they put in. So I went ahead and put yes here for this one. Now let's move on to the second part of the questionnaire, which focused on identifying problem areas in games that you're working. There were 16 different questions here, and all of them could be answered with never, rarely, frequently, almost always. So we'll go through each one, and I'll give you my thoughts on what I'm seeing, and I definitely want to know in the comments what you're seeing as problem areas in your games. Again, the question to be answered is, are these items a problem in your area? Question 1. Improperly lined batter's boxes, more and more hitter stances beginning with part of their feet inside what would be the inside of the white line, although the back of their foot may be still able to touch the batter's box line. So for me, I put never on this. It's not been an issue in any game I've seen. Yes, sometimes the white lines do get kicked out just by gameplay, moving the dirt around, but I've not really had an issue with players not getting in the box or a box not well put together. You know, if the box is improperly lined, sometimes I might kick the dirt a little bit just to get the line gone, and then I might draw it with a bat or whatever. But I've never seen this as an issue. I would not want to see any rules changes around this. Question 2. Inappropriate comments from a team bench towards the opponent, bench jockeying. For this, I put frequent, and I really think the issue needs to be resolved from higher levels than umpires on the field. I think we need more clarity on what should be considered bench jockeying, as well as assistance from administrators on how we want to enforce that so that we're being consistent from game to game and crew to crew. Currently, there's just not a lot of consistency there, and I think this really needs to come from higher ups, clarifying what they want addressed and how they want it addressed. Question 3. Dugouts that are unsafe because of inadequate fencing or netting. So recently in GHSA, we've seen a lot of schools installing these nets outside of the dugouts, maybe in front of the original nets that were about waist high. But now we're seeing schools install nets that go from the bottom all the way to the top of the dugout. Now, I don't see this as an issue that we need the rules committee to get involved with, and I don't think it's necessarily an umpire issue. But I can understand why they've started doing that, especially a lot of the older fields. The dugouts are probably closer than they need to be. But I think this is a change that will mostly come through insurance companies and doesn't necessarily need any interaction from the NFHS. Question 4. Slow pace caused by teams not hustling to and from the field between innings. So I did say this was a big problem in the games I've been seeing. And, there are rules that we have, but personally, I think they're just so unrealistic that it then becomes really hard to work with them. The first rule is 60 seconds from the last out to the next pitch at the start of the inning. And that's probably just way too fast. And when we have rules that aren't realistic to enforce, then they end up unenforced. So I'm not a big fan of that option. I'll also point out that college, for example, they have, I think it's 120 seconds. a lot of pitchers can probably be warmed up and ready to go faster than that, at least if we're giving them that 5-pitch limit. So if you then just say, well, we're going to do X amount of time and not count the pitches, that can also end up leading to more time being lost between innings. So there's a good and a bad here. I think what we really need to do is probably look at setting a realistic and practical standard for that amount of time. And we'll cover that a little bit more further on in the survey. Question 5. 2 coaches on communication devices in the same dugout during a game. For the last 2 years, I've not really had any issues with this in my games. Honestly, I think that this is a great way for us to look at increasing the pace of play is by expanding the use of these devices. So not an issue for me. I'd definitely be open to an expansion of it. 6. The number of player-to-player conferences affecting the pace of play during a game. For this, I said frequently. I feel like in our games, we do have a lot of requests for a catcher to go talk to their pitcher. Now, I think we should be careful about what you ask for if you want to put a limit in here. There's times where you tell the catcher, hey, go tell him to come set. There's times where a kid does need to be calmed down. And, this is the learning part of sports, right? We're teaching these young men how to support each other, how to be good teammates. And there is an aspect that comes to this part. I'd like to see some limit put into place and probably more guidance on what should and should not be acceptable. But I understand why there could be some worry about putting in a hard limit in that it takes away an officiating tool that umpires have used previously. Like I said, giving warnings to come set, telling them not to do something. You get hit really hard and you say, hey, go talk to your pitcher. Give me a second. There's so many things that you might use it for in the course of a game currently. We'll just have to learn how to adjust if we get a limit put into place. 7. Coaches, players, or other bench personnel outside the dugout during live ball play. So in GHSA, we tend to be somewhat lenient on coaches. We'll let them stand outside the dugout, but usually within just about arm's reach. Part of the reason we do this, I think, is just some of the dugouts are small. And I don't know about for all of them, but certainly for me, I really don't want to stand next to 15, 17-year-olds talking about all the nonsense they're going to talk about during a game. That's why often you'll look in a dugout and you'll see all the players are usually at the front of the dugout, right at the edge where they can support their teammates, yelling and screaming. But the coaches tend to hang out on the other side of the dugout or maybe just outside of it. I haven't seen this as a problem in my games with the coaches. Now, I am very strict about players, and I will put them back in the dugout. But to say this is an issue, I just don't think it is. Question 8. Garments, hoodies, worn as part of a player's uniform that create a safety issue. Items that are not part of the official uniform. Down here in Georgia, I said never. We play the first half of the season when it is cold out, and it still gets cold sometimes at the end. We certainly don't have the problems I imagine you would north of the Mason-Dixon. So things might be a little colder up there, but I said for us down here, this is really not an issue. Question 9. Sub-varsity games being played with baseballs without the NOXI label. Again, I said this is never an issue here. GHSA is pretty strict about it, and umpires are supposed to report anytime they go on the field and these balls aren't made available. And GHSA will fine a school if they're not playing with legal baseballs. This change happened, from my understanding, many years ago, and I think it was a great change to the rules book. I think it was a good change for the NFHS. There's really not a lot of excuse here for teams not to be doing it. So I said this has never been an issue in my games. Curious if it is in any of yours. Question 10. Too many offensive timeouts in a game. So I don't think this question was very clear whether or not it was referring to conferences or just batters stepping out of the box, requesting time to fix their gloves or what have you. If it was offensive conferences, I don't think that's been an issue. But offensive timeouts, players stepping out of the box, I do think that has been an issue. I think they request time too often. I regularly just tell them no when they ask for time. But, that's something that can be difficult for umpires, and it's just an unnecessary thing added to the game. So it's something that, if it's that scenario, then I would answer frequently or almost always this comes up in my games. Again, I'll try to shut it down early, tell them no, but it's something I'd like to see addressed. Ultimately, though, I don't know that you can address it on the batter side without going into a more strict pitch clock on the pitchers. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Question 11. Profanity on the field, not directed at officials, consider lesser penalty. So I think on this one, I said it's rarely an issue. You do hear F-bombs and whatever every once in a while, and it's not appropriate for the field, but I think it's unrealistic for anyone out there to say that the F-bomb dropped in one context versus another isn't different. That's just the way that our language is right now, right? There's a difference between F you and let's effing go. Now, I'm going to try to shut down the yelling of any of them, but I would like to see there being some type of lesser penalty put into the rule book that we could utilize somewhere between just the verbal, hey, knock that off, and you're ejected. Because sometimes, I think the emotions get caught up. It's just something that they say a lot at their age. I'd like to see there be an in-between where we can, formally address something with a penalty, but at the same time, not go all the way to ejection, which is just often overkill. Question 12, wind up and set pitching positions, allowing too much variance. So this one, I said never. I am incredibly frustrated every time this question comes up because I think the NFHS did a great job clarifying and making it simple for coaches, players, and umpires to determine if a player is in the windup or the set. Either that pivot foot is parallel to the rubber or it's not. And if you can't tell because parallel is, 0 degrees versus 1 degree, then just look to see if they pick up their heel and reset it, then they were definitely in the windup. I really do not want to see this rule changed. I think it's great the way it is. If you're an umpire, you have a responsibility to be enforcing this, to be enforcing it from game 1 of the preseason. Get this out there, get the change enforced. But once we enforce it, this is a very easy rule to follow. So I put never here. I don't want to see any changes made to it. I think it's great as it is. Question 13, stepping on first baseman's ankles, feet, while running to touch first base on a routine ground ball. So for this question, I said never. I haven't had any issues with stepping on an ankle or stepping on a foot. That said, I have seen a collision at first on a play where a fielder coming to cover and the runner collided, and it resulted in the runner breaking a leg and a shin. So I've seen bad collisions. It just didn't apply in this context that they gave here. So for me, I said never. I would be curious to know, are you seeing this a lot in your games? Question 14, too much protective gear to take off after an at-bat. So for this question, I put rarely now. It would have been never, but I did start to see this year kids just not as fast to get it off or not hustling to hand it to a coach. Generally, what I would say is I ain't giving you time because you're taking so long to get your stuff off. If you're at second base, then yeah, I'll give you time to go run it to the coach. But if you're at first base, I'm not giving you time to take off all your straps. You should be able to just get it off quickly, or that's on you. I understand why players are opting to wear this stuff, and I don't blame them. Now, the elbow guard is annoying because they will stick that in front of a pitch to try to say they got hit. But the rest of it, I think, is, it's understandable why they have it, especially, around the legs where we see them get hit by foul balls all the time. So I wouldn't want to see something necessarily limiting what they can wear, but I am curious, could they run in it more? We see players, if they hit a triple, they're going to run all the way to third with the same gear on. Maybe we should just require them to keep it on the entire time they run. Curious again, what are your thoughts on this? I'll be curious to see what they say. If they do come away with a rule that says, you have to wear it the whole time. I mean, you ran all the way at some point with it on. Why can't you continue doing that? So that'll be interesting to see. Question 15. Coaches not in proper uniform, baseball pants. So coaches not in proper uniform, I would have said rarely, but then it specified baseball pants, and I said never for that. From what I've seen this year, coaches know to wear baseball pants. They do that. I think where we're starting to see some deviation that is not allowed by rule is that you're starting to see more of them wear t-shirts or long sleeve shirts with their baseball pants. Now, by rule, they're required to be in team uniform. The exception has been made at the high school level and levels above that wearing a windbreaker or, a half sleeve jacket, that's been okay for years. But as we get further away from that, I've started to see coaches going with short sleeve shirts or long sleeve shirts, something without a collar, but clearly not a jacket, tucked into their pants. Now, is this the biggest issue that's in front of us with baseball? I definitely think the answer to that is no. But I would say that that's where I'm starting to see the deviation that might be an issue, but definitely not with pants. Question 16. Communication equipment transmitting on the same frequency for both teams hearing each other's communications. Again, this has never been an issue for me or that I've noticed in my games. There's been some issues with, sometimes a headphone comes out or whatnot, but I've not heard of any issue with frequency problems between teams. Let me know if you've seen that, because I'd be curious about that. But at least from what I've seen, this hasn't been an issue. Finally, we get to part 3, which asks if we'd be in favor of the following changes. Question 1, permitting one-way communication between the head coach, pitcher, and catcher. For this, I said yes. Having worked college baseball, I can tell you when the communication goes not only from the coach to the catcher, but from the coach to the pitcher directly, it just speeds up the pace of play, and I don't think it gives any unfair advantage, but anything that keeps the game moving faster, I think is a benefit to the game. Question 2, allowing video replay in selected contests, state championship. I'll say yes because I think states should have the option whether or not they want to do that. That being said, I can tell you that I don't think you're going to get a lot of valuable replay in pretty much any high school game. Question 3, using a double first base bag for risk minimization. So for this question, I put yes. I'd be in favor of this, and I think where it will really help is when it comes to the runner's lane interpretation that was put out this year. Now, I know a lot of states are not using that interpretation, and I don't blame them. It's contradictory to the rule book, and really, it's just not practical, right? That said, it's never made a lot of sense that the bag be in fair territory and the runner's lane be in foul territory. It's not working well, and I think it's caused a lot of issues. I think the best solution here would be if we put in the double first base and we don't make it as aggressive to enforce as the college rule, but simply say that the last half distance, when a ball is being fielded to first, the runner has to be in the runner's lane, then that means that we wouldn't need a rule saying, in this scenario, you got to touch this bag. In this scenario, you got to touch that bag or that color. You just say, if the ball's thrown to first and you're not in the runner's lane, you've interfered, you're out, and we're going to have a penalty. This way, the real penalty is around the runner's lane, not which bag they touch. But I think putting this in place, one, it will reduce injuries, including a very bad injury I saw this year. But ultimately, I think this makes the runner's lane rules work a hell of a lot better. So I'd love to see a first base bag put in the double first base. You're seeing it now at the college level. I think it would be a good benefit for us. But I really think with all the issues around the runner's lane that we've had this year and the last several years, I think this is the best solution for the NFHS to really create a first base runner's lane situation that works well for everyone. Question 4, umpires not policing eye black. Okay, so I don't know who this is an issue for out there. I'm going to say yes, because I don't want umpires policing eye black, but there's really no rule out there or interpretation or anything like that this should be an issue for probably 98% of you. There's no limitations on how they put it on, as I interpret it, and as I really think everyone should. The only thing is you can't write FU in eye black or have eye black that says, FU or whatnot on it. Obvious things like that. But this shouldn't be an issue that any of you are dealing with. So I was surprised that it's on here, but yeah, umpires were not policing eye black. That is a silly thing to have on there. And really, I think it's a softball thing, which just goes back to the number of people that think softball and baseball are the same is disturbing because they're very different. And, you can umpire both, but it ain't the same job. Question 5, not allowing protective gear to be removed on doubles to improve base of play, making first or third base coach run onto the field to retrieve the protective gear. So I'd be curious to see if this change actually benefited us. I don't know of any league that has this in place. They did run all the way to second base with the equipment on. So, it's reasonable to say you got there, now you got to keep it. Maybe that would help improve pace of play. I don't know that it's really delaying it all that much. I don't know. I don't feel strongly about it. I could say yes, I could say no. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, though, or if you work in a league that has said you can't call time at second to turn your gear over to coach. I'll go ahead and say yes, because I'm curious to see what other people say, and I'm all for improving pace of play, but I just don't know that this is really that big of an issue or that effective of the solution. So let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you think. Question 6, reducing the number of allowed defensive conferences. Allowing a total of 6 defensive conferences combined between coaches and defensive players, and coaches cannot use more than 3 of those conferences. If the defensive personnel use more than 3 conferences, the coach would then have his total number of conferences reduced. Any visit after 6 conferences would require that the pitcher be removed. Extra innings would allow 1 defensive conference per extra inning. Rule 4-4-5 would still apply during conferences. So this proposal here would make NFHS baseball a lot more similar to collegiate baseball by implementing this, 3 coaches conferences and then 3 player conferences, but players can use more from the coaches. Now, there are pros and cons to this. Yes, I do think this would improve pace of play, and that is something worth going after. But there are some issues that we use player conferences for as umpires that we would suddenly lose. I think most of us have called time and told the catcher, hey, go tell your pitcher to come set. It's preventative umpiring. Sometimes the level of play is not that great. It's real easy to think about these rules changes when you're talking about, top 2 varsity teams. But as you get further away from that, when you get to lower levels of competition, lower skill level, suddenly these conversations become helpful, right? There is an aspect of teaching kids to be good teammates and going and supporting their teammate. I'm pro a rules change here. I think this could be the option, but there's certainly aspects of it that I am concerned about that, just good luck to the rules committee in solving it. It won't be easy. So I'm going to say yes here, but, I want to bring to all your attention that this will take away a couple tools that are currently in our toolbox. So just something to keep in mind with this potential rules change. Question 7, expanding the use of electronic communications to include other players on the field. For this one, I said yes. From the collegiate games I've worked, I've seen a huge benefit to pace of play when at least the pitcher is getting the call from the dugout. What we have now speeds up the game a little bit by going from the coach to the catcher, but the catcher still has to signal it to the pitcher, and then you got to see if the pitcher can see it, and inevitably the pitcher can't see the signal, and then the catcher goes out there and tells them how they're going to do a tap signal, which, by the way, goes back to our last question of, I'd rather the catcher go out there and talk to him and get that straightened out than not, and, I'm getting drilled the rest of the game. But going back to it, I think this would do a great job increasing the pace of play. I don't really see any downside to it. I understand why some schools or leagues might not be able to implement it, but I think at least give people the opportunity. It doesn't give them a competitive advantage, but definitely increases the pace of play. Question 8, creating another form of disciplinary action less severe than ejection. So this one I said yes. For coaches, we currently have a dugout restriction. Now, you can't restrict a player to the dugout for behavioral issues, but We need some kind of other penalty to be in there. Like I said in an earlier example, there needs to be something that is between just knock it off and you're ejected. I've heard people talk about using like a yellow card system like soccer. And yeah, we can say whatever you want about soccer. And I do think soccer overall is terribly officiated. That's an aside we won't get on now. But I could see something like a yellow card situation working where, they add up over time and, maybe you do something like if you get 2 yellow cards in 7 games, you have to sit a game or something like that. This is going to take a creative solution, and it's going to be hard to find that. But, we can't be as liberal with ejections at this level as they are at the professional level, because at the pro level, it's like a $25 fine and you sit out the rest of that game, but you're back the next day. At the high school level, usually a multi-game suspension. For coaches, it's a significant fine, at least in GHSA. There needs to be something better put into place there. I don't know exactly what that solution is, but I would love to see the committee at least looking into it, trying to address it. It's a difficult challenge, but I think one worth looking at for sure. Question 9, restricting coaches from entering fair territory when questioning, discussing an umpire's ruling. For this one, I said yes. This has been in place in a couple of states already, and it's at the collegiate level. I'd love to see this put in place. It just makes it easier for a base umpire to get away from an obnoxious coach, and will cut down on the questions that just aren't needed, right? Like a steal at second base and whatever the play at second is, you didn't see any better in the dugout. I'm right on top of it wherever I was in the middle of the infield, and I'm not going to get help. So anything we can do to cut down those unnecessary discussions, and really anything we can do to make, just tell coaches like a lot of it is judgment calls and you just got to suck it up and go with it. You don't get to complain and moan about everyone. We got to keep the pace of play moving. I'm all for this. Question 10, requiring pitchers to declare wind-up or set position prior to assuming pitching position. This needs to be a no. Everybody needs to put no. This is not an issue. It does not need to be changed. The rule is very simple as it is. They're either parallel with that pivot foot or they're not. We don't want to get into declaring. I've seen it in the college game. It's a waste of time. It's annoying, and it's just not necessary, right? Like, it's the pivot foot. It's simple. It's easy. I don't care if it's what the kid has done all summer or whatnot. That's, summer umpires not enforcing the rules is not surprising or different. But high school level, high school umpires focused on the NFHS game. This is an easy rule as it is. We don't need a rules change here. That'll only make things worse. It'll only slow down play. Keep it as it is. Question 11, requiring the fronts of dugouts to be completely covered with fencing or netting. Again, I said no here. We have schools that have been required by their county now to put in full netting on the dugouts, and, more power to them. It's really not a problem for me in my role at all. I understand why they're doing that. I think it's a good idea for teams to do that. I think most teams should do that. Obviously, this varies from dugout to dugout, field to field, but I don't see why this would need to be in the rule book. There doesn't need to be a rule book change. If they want to put out a policy encouraging it or whatnot, that's great, but leave it up to the states to enforce this. It doesn't need to be added to the rule book as more that we have to deal with as umpires. Question 12, requiring umpires to use a stopwatch to time the intervals between innings. I am very much pro this. I think to improve the pace of play, we need to move towards a requirement that umpires use timing devices and use them consistently. As the rules are currently written and enforced, that 20-second timer that's in there, it's just nobody uses it. It doesn't work that one umpire does and another doesn't. That's an issue. Yes, it's an NFHS issue, but honestly, it's a state issue. It's an association issue. There's a lot of parties that can make that better. But I think the first step to really improving the pace of play issues is that we need to start encouraging umpires to bring out a stopwatch and really directing them on how and when is appropriate to use it, and the level of strictness and enforcement needed. Finally, question 13, enacting special rules for extra inning games. So this is one that I would bet there are states out there that do use something like a runner starts on second base. We don't do that in GHSA baseball, but it's something I would probably like to see put in place. I don't have a lot of games go to extra innings, but I can understand why we would want to do something like that, especially on school nights. I've seen games going way too late, especially double headers scheduled on a school night. So I'd like to see something put in place to overall shorten games, keep them more concise, and ultimately get us to a reasonable ending at a reasonable time. So there you go. That's my review of the 2025 NFHS Baseball Rules Questionnaire. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. You can find a link to take it in the description, but let me know. Are there things that you disagreed with me on? Are there other topics that you thought were left out but need to be addressed? Again, take the survey. It closes next Tuesday, April 29th, but definitely voice your opinion, voice your concerns. I think this is a great opportunity for us to give our input and hopefully give the Baseball Rules Committee an idea of what changes they should look into at their conference this summer. So, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the field.